If you have been married for more than a few months, chances are pretty good that you have become frustrated with your spouse, with your husband in particular. Like maybe he, leaves his dirty dish in the sink, even though you say, could you just please put that in the dishwasher? It'll take you 2 seconds, but he keeps on leaving the dirty dish in the sink, or whatever annoying little habit he has. Or maybe it's something bigger that has caused you to be super frustrated with your husband. Maybe he seems to spend money wildly outside of the budget that you guys agreed to, and you're like so frustrated. Or maybe he seems a bit controlling and you're like, oh, you just get so frustrated. Or maybe he's drinking a little bit too much, or playing video games a little too much, or whatever, and you're just super frustrated with him. Well, I want to share a couple of things. And the first is this: if he is doing something that is not just annoying, but actually a sin against you, such as drinking like crazy and even drinking and driving with your kids in the back seat, okay, that's something pretty serious, and you need to respectfully, lovingly, but firmly confront him and talk about some very necessary changes that need to happen and how you want to come alongside of him and help him overcome this destructive habit. But if it's more of the small annoyance, which can seem big after a while, you know what I mean? Like those things that just start to irritate you. Well, if it's that kind of a thing, I want to encourage you to take a step back in those moments when you're starting to get frustrated again. And I want you to ask yourself this question: Lord, show me why my husband is acting this way or doing that annoying thing. Because often when I pause and actually try to understand and have compassion for, God is so quick to give me a little insight that shows me why my husband might be acting in that way. And this is really biblical. In fact, I want to direct your attention to 1 Peter 3, verse 8, where God says, finally, all of you, be like-minded, be sympathetic, love one another, be compassionate and humble. So in that moment where your husband is annoying you with perhaps some just dumb habit that he has that just frustrates you, why don't you pause and try to be compassionate and ask God to give you understanding for what might be prompting your husband to do that specific thing. Because 10 to 1, in fact, I'd say the odds are more like, 1,000,000 to 1 that your husband is waking up every morning and saying like, I wonder how I can annoy my wife today. Let's see what would really bug her. People don't do that unless your husband's truly a psychopath. He's probably not, working for ways to annoy you every single day and striving to annoy you every day. Probably not. But there's always a reason why people behave the way they do. Is it because he is feeling disrespected? Is it because he's feeling like he doesn't have purpose in life? Is he trying to comfort himself because maybe he's still struggling with wounds from childhood? There's always a reason why a person acts the way that they do. So ask God to give you that compassion, that sympathy, that deep understanding as to why your husband might be doing that annoying, frustrating thing that drives you crazy. Because once you have that bit of compassion, it changes everything. That's what I found. When I have that compassion, I can kind of let go of the frustration and realize that he is an imperfect human being, and I have like that sympathy and compassion for him that just dissolves away all of my resentment, my bitterness, and my frustration. I recommend practicing that yourself in those frustrating moments. You know what comes to mind is that compassion trumps judgment every time. Or as the Bible puts it in James 2:13, mercy triumphs over judgment.